So I know a lot of you are working in sort of that cross-product area of data security and AI security. If you work in that area, stick around, man. We got an expert here who's going to give us some insight into how we both protect data using AI and also kind of use AI to do some things that we couldn't do before. It's opening up some new possibilities around enterprise security. So I hope you stick around. I think you'll enjoy the discussion today. Hi, Matt Amoroso from TAG. I want to welcome you to our discussion today. We're going to be talking about data security and artificial intelligence, kind of the confluence of the two and how they, I hope, will make enterprise security easier. It'd be tough to make it any harder, right? So I have a good friend of mine here, Dimitri, Sirota, who runs a company called BigID that specializes in this area, but even better, who is an expert himself. So I'm going to ask him some questions about this topic. So Dimitri, how are you doing?
Nice I'm pretty good, Ed. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming to New York City.
Yeah, my pleasure. It used to be my stomping ground. It's nice to be back, especially in the summer.
It's nice to have you back.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, for people who, I know a lot of people really do know the company and admire what you do. Couple people don't know, give just a thumbnail on what you guys do.
So BigID started off as a cloud-native data security and compliance platform to help organizations get visibility and control around their crown jewels, their high-risk, high-value data, structured, unstructured, cloud, legacy data center, SaaS, all in one platform. And our kind of claim to fame was that we provide more ways of identifying sensitive and critical data. We provide more actions in terms of remediation and retention and labeling and redaction, et cetera. And then more recently, we've added a whole host of new AI capabilities to start addressing both data security and compliance and AI security and compliance.
Do these compliance requirements come from kind of customers, regulators, assessors? Like, where are these requirements coming from?
Sure. So if you think about risk when it comes to data, and again, data is important because it really is the fuel that kind of drives the digital economy. And even when you're thinking about AI and Gen AI, most companies are not building foundation frontier models. All they're doing is enriching an existing model like OpenAI with their data. So data is at the kind of the heartbeat of it, right? In terms of how you train and how you use for employees with co-pilots and agents. So look, I think at the end of the day, regulations play a big role in data. Over the last probably since 2018 when GDPR came out in May I think 6th or something like that, data has become a minefield. Because data contains information around your healthcare, your payroll, financial information, non-public information, intellectual property, whether it's patents, whether it's recipes, whether it's designs for new chipsets. There's a lot of data. And so I think over the last probably 7 years, hundreds of new regulations have emerged. Some are data sovereignty, so you can't share this data. Some are export controls, like ITAR in the military industry. Some are privacy regulations. I think today there's almost 200 privacy regulations. There's 20 in the US alone.
Wow. Yeah.
Some are healthcare, like HIPAA, but there's a version of that in almost every country. And on top of that, there's also controls, right? We're all familiar with NIST. We're familiar with OWASP. There's a whole host of other ones. NIST has many, including ones for AI.
Right.
And so as you think about data risk, you're always thinking about security risk, and that usually divides into insider risk, right? My employees, I don't want them going home with all my critical data. And external risk, right? I don't want some bad actor or nation state or whatever kind of taking that. But in addition to the security risk, there's regulatory risk. And again, regulatory could be privacy, it could be healthcare, it could be PCI, it could be a whole host. And you want to be able to look at data holistically. So because it is sensitive, because it's a crown jewel, because it's the high value, high risk stuff, you want to know what is the potential risk and be able to remediate that risk in terms of my employees, in terms of external actors, but also make sure that you are within limits of compliance with the regulations and controls.
I mean, it's been an issue forever. What is AI? What's prompting sort of the renewed interest? Is it just sort of an explosion of data, or is there something else that drives
So
it?
I think originally there was just a surface. So compliance was kind of sequestered off with kind of GRC solutions, but GRC solutions started not by really looking at the data, but relying on surveys and questionnaires and kind of more paper forms. And I think as technologies like BigID emerged around 2018, 2019, that said, hey, we could basically understand your data from a risk standpoint, holistically, security, compliance. We could basically start by giving you that kind of visualization around where your data is, how that data is getting used, but simultaneously, what is that risk around that data, both in terms of employees, in terms of external actors like contractors, people you partner with, but also in terms of the regulations that you conform to and that you need to comply with because you're a regulated business. And as we know, privacy regulations cross industries, right? So if you want to comply with the Colorado privacy regulation, it doesn't really matter what industry you're in. And so we provide that kind of one-stop shop to give organizations the ability to track their performance both from a security risk, compliance risk, but also help them basically take the kinds of actions, whether they're reporting, whether they're responding to a data access request. So we do all of that in one single platform.
Everybody watching knows that you can push an AI button, an LLM or Gen AI now, and have it generate almost unbounded amounts of data. Is that a big piece of this problem now, where you got these buttons you push and it creates volumes of stuff that become maybe targeted assets?
So let's talk about
the problem.
I would kind of define the kind of AI risk kind of map into three things. So one, and this is kind of just being honest for your audience, and they should all kind of know, every vendor now does AI. I think you'd be hard pressed to find any vendor that says we're not using AI. The problem is most vendors are not very transparent about how they're using AI. So whether it's LLM, whether it's graph, or whether it's other technologies like cluster analysis or whatever. So I think thing one for everybody in the audience, they need to kind of get wise around how the vendors need to disclose that. They need to be able to do a risk assessment. Now BigID also does that. The second area is actually thinking through exactly what they could do. Now, everyone is talking LLM. BigID uses LLM. A lot of the people in the DSPM, and almost everybody does it. But again, a word to the wise. LLMs are not a panacea. They don't do all things. They're not all singing, all dancing, right? So when it comes to things like classification, very slow, very inaccurate, because the models like Claude, Anthropic, OpenAI, they're not trained on sensitive data. They're trained on Moby Dick. They're trained on public domain information, Reddit. So they're not trained on credentials and things. And on top of that, they're trained on, they're based on kind of like embeddings and vectorization, and they're kind of a token transformer model. So they're useless for structured data. So they're slow, they're costly, they're imprecise, and on top of that, they're only limited to, so you need to think through about having the right kind of AI for the right kind of purpose. So as you're thinking through vendors and solutions, any vendor that says, I use LLM exclusively, just do a little experiment. Send all your data to Anthropic and see what happens, right? Because that is an LLM. Now, the third piece is being able to build the safeguards around the actual adoption of AI in your company, right? So that could mean in terms of shadow AI, right? I think a lot of your audience remembers the shadow IT days. First it was servers under your desk.
Still a problem.
It is. Well, you thought that was a problem. The bigger problem is it's so easy to adopt unsanctioned AI. So think about it. I want to get a subscription to Perplexity. I can, and I can send it anything in my company. I want to basically download DeepSeek. Right, Chinese developed a model. Who knows what's under the covers? I can go download it. Who's watching? So there's the adoption of unsanctioned AI. There's also the adoption of, or the use of data, inappropriate data, with that AI. And so one thing we've developed is we've developed a whole host of safeguards in terms of discovery of the AI, in terms of discovery of what data goes into that AI. So being able to solve for that lineage problem. I think we're the first to do that, but giving people that whole situational awareness, right? That kind of government mentality so that you have complete awareness around what is your data landscape, what is your AI landscape, and what is that interplay between the data and the AI, because that is a huge, huge risk. So those are three things. Think about how your vendor is using AI, make sure they're providing you the full transparency and explanation. And then lastly, think about how your company is thinking around AI and making sure that you have the proper tooling to understand and have full awareness around where you have AI and where you have data going into that AI.
Does that architecture, that discovery awareness architecture, extend to agentic architectures, or is that a whole different game?
No, it does. So agents are to some degrees identities, right? So most vendors have this kind of triangulation between already identity, AI, and data, right? So BigID has that kind of like holy trinity, if you will. I don't want to be blasphemous, but there is this kind of interplay. Historically, identities refer to humans, right? You and I that have a pulse. Agents are essentially proxies, right? They have skills just like you and I. They have certain access to certain things and not access to other things, right? In terms of the tooling. And they have certain training, right? Like just like, we were talking about our kids in college and so forth. So they have an identity. And so when we think about use cases like how do I manage employee access to AI, you think about not just LLMs, where you're thinking about training the LLMs. You're not just thinking about Copilot, right? Where I maybe have MS Copilot, or maybe I'm using OpenAI, or maybe I have Gemini from Google. But you're also thinking about those assistants, those agentic assistants that are acting on your employees' behalf in the future. So I think as we at BigID think about all the controls we're putting in place, and again, it's more than just giving you the awareness, it's actually layering in controls and guardrails and so forth. 100% we are thinking about LLMs, i.e. a transformer model. We are thinking about co-pilots, right? Where you're sitting in your Microsoft environment or your Google environment or your Anthropic environment. And we're thinking about agents, where you're basically interfacing and interacting with these assistants that are acting on your behalf. And you need to be able to safeguard all of those interactions.
Let me give you a very common scenario, and then you tell me how you classify the mitigation. And you'll recognize this immediately. A employee sitting with an LLM in an enterprise thinks, I wonder what my supervisor makes for a living. Goes and asks Copilot to go figure it out. It goes off, it hits Microsoft Graph, it looks around, and in some SharePoint that the employee didn't know existed, but the AI finds exec.pdf or something.
Famous
and it
example.
Goes back and says, oh, your boss makes more than you do.
And maybe I've just found out what everybody in my company makes, and maybe I've just found out what the person sitting at the next desk with the same title.
So I mean, is that a black light that the AI is shining on a data security problem, or is that an AI security problem that needs to be throttled? Or maybe it's both.
So there's two problems there in BigID. Surprise, surprise.
You're a good guy to talk to, but you kind of go either way.
So let me kind of talk through it. So if you're a data scientist training your model, right? I'm building the Copilot, I'm building the agentic assistant. The use case there is I want to be able to make sure I'm not putting dangerous data in the model. Because what people fail to realize is models have memories. Right, so some of your audience may have heard of vector databases. The vector databases essentially act like a kind of a memory. And so the data persists there, right? There's reference data that is stored there, and there's embeddings, which is what the transformer models use, but it's stored there. So what you need to do is have a secure data pipeline on the upfront, right? Do as much as you can to be able to identify risk, including attributes in a file and code, could be credentials, could be payroll information, and be able to cleanse it. So redact it, tokenize it out.
Right.
And then make sure that you have the proper controls. So you could say, okay, this data, once it's cleansed, once I've checked for compliance, is only shared with this new model. So that use case, which BigID does end to end, is kind of geared for more the data science team, kind of the CDO organization, sometimes the CISO organization. But let's say you didn't use BigID upfront for that purpose, and you did nothing, and your team just kind of said willy-nilly, hey, I just found a bunch of payroll, HR data, and I've sent it into the AI, my job is done. So you need the safeguards on the back end. You need to be able to safeguard that situation where Dimitri, who's maybe in administration,
Right.
or maybe is an executive assistant, doesn't have access or should not have access. They don't have the privileges. So let me talk a little bit about what you do in that use case. So the way we've designed our prompt protection, or this idea of managing or governing employee access to AI, whether it's a co-pilot or whether it's an agentic assistant, we divide into kind of 4 areas that you need to think about it. So one is that prompt interface. I want to make sure that there's no blue words, there's no kind of offending terms that either I'm transmitting or that are getting back sent back. So we do that. Those are kind of often thought of as proxies, and you could basically just filter out. And the thing that you're going to want to look for is things that could also look at exchanges, communication over a long over a long duration, right? Because typically with a lot of the newer models, they have long coherence. So you could send them a question, they send you a response, you respond to that question, and so you want to be able to look over the whole conversation. That's one thing, but that's not enough. Now you'll want to also be able to build guardrails, policies with enforcement capabilities that make sure that the response from the AI doesn't violate the rules, right? Payroll information. If I see somebody's salary attached to the CEO's name, block it, right? So those are policies and guardrails. Thirdly,
By the way, back on that, where am I doing the blocking? How do I know where to put it?
the blocking, so remember there's a proxy already in place, or, and I'll come, where there's not a proxy, there's situations where you can't have a proxy, right? I'm inside of OneDrive.
Yeah.
There's no proxy.
Right.
Like, what am I gonna block?
Right.
So there, the mechanism is labeling, right? So vendors like BigID have an ability to label not just by sensitivity, but also by things like safer AI use. And most of the AIs now have an ability to be able to only access data that is safe for AI use.
Okay. Makes
Right,
sense.
and including transmitting. Another area, and this is kind of a BigID innovation, is, as I mentioned, let's assume the data scientists were careless and that payroll information and HR information got into the vector database. How do I check the vector database and then make sure at the inference stage, when I'm interfacing and it's kind of putting it all together, that data doesn't get used? So what we've done is we're the first vendor in the DSPM, DLP, DAM, DAG, whatever D-flavored acronym you want, to also scan vector databases and to label vector databases. And the labeling is important because if I know that user doesn't have the right level of privilege based on kind of what their role is in AD or LDAP, I could block. And so when we introduce this in a couple months, we'll be the first vendor to have that. The last piece that's part of the kind of the equation around managing end-to-end employee access to AI is just tracking what data they're sharing. So again, ideally, the data is already pre-labeled, right? Safe for AI. Like I said, BigID does it. But then you'll still want to have an audit trail, right? There's regulations, like the European AI Act, that require to know what data was shared. And so again, you want to be able to look at data activity monitoring, DAM, because security people love acronyms. Mm-hmm. And data certainly has its fair share. You want to be able to apply that to the data. Like, so if I'm in a OneDrive, I have certain data available. Ideally, it's already labeled. Ideally, it's labeled by BigID. But I'll want to be able to monitor and look for particular anomalies or violations of rules, like data that of a particular sensitivity was not shared. So those are the 4 components. I'm doing 8 here, or 10. But those are the 4 components. What we think is a complete solution. And again, that's one of the solutions we are introducing in the second half of this year.
People watching, should they be thinking POC, trial? Is that normally how you get people on board?
We do. Look, we pride ourselves on POCs, and we do we have a 5-day what do we call it? A BigID Express kind of program where we could basically do a full POC in the cloud. Now, we have a lot of regulated companies that do more full-fledged POCs, and the product is versatile enough that they could get.
That's more like a trial deployment.
It's more like a trial deployment, right? Kind of your former employer, kind of these larger companies that have more complex environments. But we also have a program, and it's kind of 5 days, and a lot of our partners in the GSI space now are certified to be able to deliver that as well.
So website, email, LinkedIn, how should people be in touch
All
with
of
you?
the chat, TikTok. I'm
Carrier
not on
pigeon.
TikTok. I'm a security guy at heart, so I'm not on TikTok. So website, BigID, BigID.com. Lots of trial options up and to the right, just like where we are in the Gartner MQ. You could also reach out to info@bigid.com and request a trial. If you want to reach out to me, feel free. I also have an Instagram account where I take pictures of where I travel. And you could always Insta me or Insta message. I'm not sure what they call it, what the kids call it, but I'm available there too.
That is fantastic. Will you come back and visit us in a few months?
Of course, anytime.
Keep us posted on your progress.
I will.
Thank you for stopping by.
Thank you.
And for everyone else watching, we'll see you next time.